It's crazy how things fall apart so fast. One day, you're living what you think is a normal life, and the next, you're questioning everything. I never thought I'd be that guy writing on a relationship forum, but here I am. I guess I just need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone out there can relate or at least give me some advice. My name's Baxter, and I've been married to Megan for 12 years. We have 2 kids, ages 8 and 5. I used to think we had a solid marriage, you know? Sure, life got busier as the kids grew, and work took its toll on both of us, but nothing we couldn't handle, or so I thought. But the past couple of years, it feels like I've been living with a stranger. Megan used to be loving, the kind of person who made me feel like the luckiest guy in the world. But now, it's like she's turned into someone else, someone I barely recognize. It started small, just little changes. She became distant. Cold. She used to laugh at my dumb jokes, but now it's just eye rolls and sighs. Whenever I'd try to talk about our relationship or anything that wasn't surface level, she'd shut down or snap at me. I could tell something was wrong, but whenever I asked, she'd brush it off, saying she was just tired or stressed. I didn't push too hard because, honestly, I didn't want to start a fight. Then there's Maxine. Oh, where do I start with her? Maxine is Megan's best friend, and to be blunt, I've never liked her. She's always been this. I don't know, bad influence. The type who thinks empowerment means doing whatever you want, regardless of how it affects others. She's been in Megan's ear for years, and I feel like it's only gotten worse. They go out for these girls' nights more often now, and every time Megan comes back, she's more distant, more dismissive of me and the kids. I started noticing other things too. She was on her phone constantly, texting someone late at night, smiling at her screen. When I'd ask who she was talking to, she'd get defensive, telling me I was being paranoid. I tried to let it go, but it just didn't sit right with me. Then one night, everything came crashing down. We were in the middle of dinner, just me, her, and the kids, and out of nowhere, she announces that she's going out the next night, on a date. A date. I honestly thought she was joking at first, like she was trying to get a reaction out of me, but she wasn't. She said it so casually, like it was no big deal. When I confronted her about it, she shrugged and said, "Baxter, this is good for our marriage. You need to understand that. Maxine says this will help us." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Help us? By going on a date with another man? I told her flat out that if she walked out that door, our marriage was over. She laughed. She laughed. "You'll get over it, Baxter. You always do," she said, like I was just some doormat she could wipe her feet on. I didn't argue anymore. I just sat there staring at her, while she got up from the table and went to the bedroom. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how the hell we got here. How the woman I loved could change so much, and worse, how I didn't see it coming. The next morning, I woke up to an empty bed. Megan was already up, getting ready for her date. I could hear her moving around the kitchen, making breakfast for the kids, acting like nothing had happened. It was surreal. I sat on the edge of the bed, my head pounding from a night of tossing and turning. The thought of her going out with another man, it made my stomach turn. When I finally went downstairs, the kids were at the table, eating cereal, and Megan was standing by the sink, scrolling through her phone. She didn't even look up when I walked in. It was like I was invisible. I tried to act normal for the kids, talking to them about their day at school, but my mind was racing. As soon as the kids ran off to get ready for school, I finally confronted her. "So you're really doing this?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "You're really going out with someone else?" Megan didn't even flinch. "Yeah, Baxter, I am. This is what I need. You just don't get it. How is this supposed to help our marriage?" I shot back. "You're telling me that going out with some guy is going to make things better between us?" She rolled her eyes, the same way she always did when she thought I was being unreasonable. "Maxine says it'll help me figure out what I want. Besides, I've been stuck in this for too long. I need something more." She said it like she was trapped, like our marriage was this weight she needed to shed. I couldn't take it anymore. I laid it out for her. "If you walk out that door, Megan, I'm done. We're done. I won't be here when you get back." For a second, I thought I saw something in her eyes. Maybe doubt, maybe guilt, but then it was gone. She shrugged, turned her back to me, and said, "You're being dramatic, Baxter. I'll be back tonight, and we'll talk when you've calmed down." It felt like she had slapped me in the face. She really didn't care. I could feel the rage bubbling up inside me, but what was the point in yelling? She had already made up her mind. All I could do was watch as she gathered her things, gave a quick hug to the kids, and left the house without another word. As the door clicked shut, it hit me. She was gone, and I had to start figuring out how to pick up the pieces. When Megan walked out the door, everything just stopped. I stood there, staring at the door, half expecting her to come back, to realize what she was doing. But the door stayed closed, and the silence in the house was deafening. The kids were upstairs, laughing and playing, oblivious to what was happening between their parents. That was the hardest part, keeping it together for them. I sat down at the kitchen table, just trying to think straight. My mind was a mess, bouncing between anger, sadness, and confusion. How did it come to this? How did the woman I've spent over a decade with, someone I built a life with, get to a point where she'd rather go on a date with a stranger than work on our marriage? I kept hearing her voice in my head. "You'll get over it, Baxter. You always do." That line stung. She said it like she was so sure I'd just roll over and let her do whatever she wanted. Like I hadn't been trying, bending over backwards, just to keep things together. But that was it, I had been trying. She hadn't. Not for a long time. That's when I made up my mind. If she wasn't willing to fight for this marriage, I wasn't going to be the only one holding it together. I wasn't going to be some background character in her life while she ran off with other men. I called my buddy Mark, who'd been through a rough divorce a few years back. I needed advice, and fast. When he picked up, I barely got the words out. "Mark, I think Megan's cheating on me, and she's out on a date right now." He didn't even hesitate. "Man, I'm sorry. You need to protect yourself. Financially, legally, emotionally. Don't wait for her to come around. You gotta act now." That was the wake-up call I needed. I couldn't just sit there feeling sorry for myself. I had to take action. I had to think about the kids, about our future, my future, without her. I started looking into divorce lawyers, and I called the bank to figure out what I needed to do to separate our finances. It felt like I was moving in a daze, doing everything on autopilot, but deep down, I knew this was the only way to take control of my life again. By the time I had everything set in motion, the day had slipped away, and it was dark outside. Megan still wasn't home. I wasn't surprised. I put the kids to bed, reading them their favorite bedtime story, trying to act like everything was fine. But my heart wasn't in it. My mind was somewhere else, preparing for what came next. I sat on the couch, staring at the front door, waiting for her to walk through it. But as the hours dragged on, I realized something. Whether she came back or not didn't matter anymore. Things would never be the same. It was close to midnight when I finally heard the sound of the car pulling up in the driveway. My heart started racing. Megan was back. I didn't know what I was expecting, an apology, maybe some sort of explanation, anything to make sense of what she'd done. But I stayed on the couch, staring at the TV that I wasn't even watching, waiting for her to make the first move. The door opened quietly, and Megan walked in. She didn't say a word, didn't even look at me. She just took off her heels, tossed her purse on the counter, and started walking toward the stairs. Like nothing happened. Like she didn't just shatter everything we'd built over the last 12 years. I couldn't let her walk away this time. "Megan," I said, my voice more calm than I felt inside. She stopped at the base of the stairs, but didn't turn around. "We need to talk." She sighed, turning slowly, like I was some kind of inconvenience. "Baxter, it's late. Can we do this tomorrow?" "No. We're doing this now," I said, standing up. "I want to know why you're doing this. Why you think going out with other men is somehow going to fix our marriage." She crossed her arms, her face set in that same cold expression she'd been giving me for months. "It's not about fixing anything, Baxter. It's about finding what makes me happy. I've been suffocating here, playing the perfect wife, the perfect mother, while you don't even notice me anymore." "Not notice you." I felt my anger starting to rise. "I've been here, Megan. Every day, trying to make this work. You're the one who's checked out." She laughed bitterly. "You think this is all on me? You haven't exactly been a great husband, either, you know. You're always working or distracted. You stopped caring a long time ago." "That's not true," I shot back, my hands clenching into fists. "I've been busting my ass for this family. Everything I do for you and the kids. But you've been acting like I don't even exist for the past 2 years. And now you think the answer is running around with other guys." Megan just rolled her eyes, that same dismissive look she'd been giving me for months. Maxine says. I cut her off. I don't care what Maxine says. She's been filling your head with this crap, making you think you need to go out and cheat to feel empowered. Do you even hear yourself? She didn't flinch. Maxine understands what I'm going through. She knows what it's like to want more from life, and she's not afraid to take it. I shook my head, trying to keep my cool. Megan, this is insane. You can't justify cheating by saying you're doing it for empowerment. You're destroying our marriage. You're tearing apart this family. For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or regret. But then it was gone, and she just shrugged. I need to do this for me, Baxter. I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not. I felt the final thread of hope snap inside me. She wasn't going to change. She wasn't going to apologize or admit that what she was doing was wrong. She was too far gone, caught up in whatever fantasy Maxine had sold her. Fine, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. If that's how you feel, then we're done. I'll be talking to a lawyer. We'll figure out the divorce and custody arrangements. Megan's face didn't change. She didn't cry, didn't argue. She just nodded, like she had been expecting this. Do what you need to do, she said flatly, then turned and walked upstairs. I sat back down on the couch, the weight of what just happened crushing me. This was it. Our marriage was over. After Megan went upstairs, I just sat there for what felt like hours. It was like my body was too exhausted to move, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. I kept thinking about everything, how it all led to this, how blind I'd been to what was going on right in front of me. But now it was real. Megan had made her choice, and I had to start making mine. The next morning, I woke up on the couch, stiff and aching. The house was quiet, and for a second, I thought maybe the whole thing had been a bad dream. But then I saw Megan's purse still on the counter, her keys sitting next to it. I realized that from here on out, everything was going to be different. I spent that morning avoiding her. The kids went off to school, and Megan stayed in our room like nothing was wrong. But I knew I couldn't avoid her forever, and I couldn't keep living like this. It was time to get serious. First thing I did was call the lawyer that Mark had recommended to me. The guy was sharp, professional, and to the point. I explained the situation, trying to keep my voice steady while I laid it all out. When I told him about Megan's affair, he asked me if I had any proof. I hadn't thought about that. No, I admitted. I mean, I know she's been going out with other guys, and she admitted it, but I don't have any hard evidence. He didn't seem surprised. That's pretty common, he said. You'll want to start gathering evidence now. Documentation will be key if this goes to court, especially with kids involved. It felt like a punch to the gut, hearing it laid out so bluntly. But he was right. I needed to protect myself and my kids. Megan clearly wasn't thinking about the consequences of her actions, but I had to. After the call, I started making a plan. First thing, I needed to separate our finances. We had a joint account for years, but there was no way I was letting her keep spending money like nothing had changed. I logged into the bank and transferred half of the funds into a new account under my name. I didn't drain the account completely, just enough to make sure I had control of what was rightfully mine. Next, I made an appointment to change the locks. I didn't know if Megan would try to leave again or bring someone back to our house while the kids were home, but I wasn't going to take any chances. I couldn't trust her anymore, not with my home, not with my kids' safety. After getting all the practical stuff in motion, the emotional weight of it hit me. I was really doing this. I was preparing for the end of my marriage. Megan stayed out of my way for most of the day, probably sensing the shift in me. I wasn't going to plead or argue anymore. I was done being the nice guy who tried to fix things that couldn't be fixed. If she wanted to blow up our lives, fine. But I was going to make sure that when the dust settled, I'd be the one standing strong, with my kids by my side. Later that evening, as I sat down with the kids to help them with their homework, Megan came into the living room, acting like nothing had changed. She started talking about her day, about how she might go out with Maxine again that weekend. It was like she didn't even care that our marriage was falling apart. I kept my focus on the kids, ignoring her as much as I could. But when she brought up her plans, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. You can do whatever you want, Megan, I said, my voice calm but firm. But I'm done with this. I've already started the divorce process. You'll be hearing from my lawyer soon. For the first time, she actually looked surprised. I think she thought I was bluffing, that I'd never actually go through with it. But I could see it hit her then, this was real. She didn't say anything. Just turned around and went back upstairs, leaving me with the kids, feeling like I had finally taken control of my own life again. The days that followed were a blur. I moved from one task to another like I was on autopilot. Work, the kids, lawyer meetings, and quietly making preparations for what was coming. The house felt different. There was this tension in the air, something I couldn't ignore. Megan and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was short, clipped sentences about the kids or the schedule. She didn't bring up the divorce again, but I knew she was thinking about it. I knew I needed more than just a lawyer's advice if I was going to get through this. So I called my brother, Aaron. He's the kind of guy who keeps his life together. Stable job, good marriage, the whole deal. I hadn't told him everything yet because, honestly, it was embarrassing. But I needed someone to talk to, someone who'd get it. When he answered, I didn't waste time. Aaron, I need to talk. It's about Megan. There was a pause, and then his voice softened. Baxter, what's going on? You sound off. I let it all spill out. Megan's distance, her nights out, Maxine's toxic influence, and the affair. I told him about the date, how she laughed when I confronted her, and how I'd finally decided to file for divorce. It all came out in one messy rant. Aaron was quiet for a moment, probably trying to process everything. Man. I'm so sorry, he finally said. I had no idea it was this bad. You've been dealing with this alone. Yeah, I muttered. Didn't know who else to turn to. Well, you're not alone anymore, he said firmly. I'm here. Whatever you need, we'll figure this out. I felt a bit of the weight lift off my chest. Just knowing I had someone in my corner made it easier to breathe. He started asking the tough questions. What about the kids? Have you told them anything yet? That hit me hard. No, not yet. They don't know what's happening, and I don't even know how to explain it to them. Aaron sighed. You're gonna have to figure that out soon. They deserve to know, Bax. But don't rush it. Just focus on keeping things as normal as you can for now. After the call, I felt a little stronger, like I wasn't completely drowning anymore. But there was still a long road ahead. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, going through the kids' school papers, when Megan walked in. She glanced at me, then sat down across from me, like she had something to say. What is it? I asked, not in the mood for games. I've been thinking, she said, her voice softer than I'd heard in weeks. About the divorce. About everything. I looked up, half expecting some kind of apology. But Megan wasn't about to backtrack. She was still in her own little world, where nothing was really her fault. I don't want to fight, she continued. We can do this the easy way. We don't have to drag it out. I almost laughed. The easy way? There's nothing easy about this, Megan. You've been cheating on me, you've been disrespecting me for months, and now you want to act like this can be some kind of smooth, friendly process. She shrugged, like it wasn't a big deal. I'm just saying, we don't need to make this harder than it has to be. We can split everything and move on. I leaned back in my chair, staring at her. Megan, you already walked out on this family. You made your choice. Now, I'm going to make sure the kids are taken care of, no matter what it takes. Her eyes flickered for a moment, but she didn't argue. She just nodded and got up from the table, leaving me sitting there, wondering how someone could be so heartless. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. But I was ready now. I wasn't the same man who begged her to stay. I wasn't going to be blindsided by her selfish choices anymore. Now it was about protecting my kids and myself, no matter what. Once Megan made it clear that she wanted to go through the divorce the easy way, I knew I couldn't rely on her to play fair. She wasn't thinking about the long-term consequences, not for me, not for the kids. I had to start taking control, quietly putting things in place to protect myself and make sure my kids didn't suffer because of her decisions. The first thing I did was get a private investigator involved. I hated the idea of spying on Megan, but I knew I needed solid proof of her affair if I wanted to make sure things went my way in court. The lawyer had been clear, evidence was everything. So I swallowed my pride and hired someone to track her movements, gather details, and document everything she was doing. It felt dirty, but I kept reminding myself that this wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure I wasn't left with nothing while Megan waltzed off into her new life, free to do whatever she wanted. Megan, meanwhile, seemed to think everything was still in her control. She started acting like we were just two roommates co-parenting. She wasn't hostile or angry anymore, but it was almost worse. She was indifferent, like she'd already moved on in her head, and I was just some leftover part of her past she had to deal with. One night, about a week after she came back from that date, I overheard her talking on the phone with Maxine in the kitchen. I couldn't make out all the details, but I heard enough to know she was still planning more dates. Maxine, as usual, was filling her head with the same toxic ideas about empowerment and self-discovery, pushing her further down this path of destruction. I stood in the hallway, listening, feeling the anger rise again. How could she talk like that, knowing she was tearing our family apart? The kids were asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware of what their mother was doing. But I knew I had to get ahead of this before it reached them. I couldn't let her bring that kind of chaos into their lives. The next day, I made another important call, to a family therapist. I wanted to be ready when the time came to tell the kids. They deserved to have someone help them through this, someone who wasn't wrapped up in the mess Megan and I were making. I didn't want them to feel like they had to pick sides or blame themselves. They were just innocent kids stuck in the middle of a storm they didn't ask for. That evening, Megan came home from one of her girls' nights with Maxine. She looked satisfied, like she was living in this fantasy world where everything was perfect for her. I was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, when she casually mentioned that she was thinking of moving out, just for a while to figure things out. I set the dish down and turned to face her. "You're seriously thinking about leaving the kids here while you go off and do whatever it is you're doing?" She shrugged, like it wasn't a big deal. "It's not like I'm abandoning them. You'll still be here. It's just, I need space. Space." That's what she kept saying. Like somehow getting away from us would solve all her problems. I didn't say anything, just nodded. I'd already made my plans. If she wanted to leave, that was fine by me. I wasn't going to stop her. But this time, I'd be the one holding the cards. She wouldn't get to walk away without consequences. I went upstairs that night and checked on the kids, watching them sleep, peaceful and unaware. My heart ached thinking about how their world was about to change, and it made me more determined than ever to protect them from whatever was coming next. Megan moving out seemed like it was coming sooner than later, and honestly, I wasn't going to fight her on it. In a weird way, her leaving would make things easier for me. Less tension in the house, less pretending that we were still some kind of functioning family. But for the kids, it was going to be tough. I didn't know how they'd take it, and that kept me up at night. The private investigator I'd hired finally sent me his first report. Turns out, Megan wasn't just going on dates, she'd been seeing more than one guy. Meeting them in hotels, lying to me about where she was going. The proof was there. Texts, pictures, everything. It hurt to see it in black and white, but at the same time, it gave me the leverage I needed. The lawyer would know exactly what to do with this. The next day, I sat Megan down. She didn't seem surprised when I told her I knew everything. She just looked at me with this detached expression and said, "It's for the best, Baxter. We're both moving on." That's when I realized, she really didn't care anymore. There was no guilt, no remorse. "All right," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But we're going to do this right. I've got evidence. The kids will stay with me. You'll get to see them, but I'm not letting you uproot their lives." For once, she didn't argue. Just nodded, like she'd already checked out completely. I stood up, walked away, and went upstairs to be with the kids. They didn't know yet, but I promised myself I'd make sure they came first, no matter what happened next. The hardest part about all of this was the kids. I dreaded the moment when I'd have to tell them that their mom was leaving, that things weren't going to be the same anymore. But I couldn't put it off forever. They deserved to know what was happening, even if I couldn't fully explain it. That weekend, after breakfast, I sat them down in the living room. Megan wasn't around. She'd stayed out the night before and hadn't bothered to come home yet. I figured it was better this way. I didn't want her turning this into something about her needs or making it more confusing for them. I took a deep breath and started. "Guys, I need to talk to you about something important. Things between your mom and me, they haven't been great lately." I paused, trying to find the right words. "Your mom is going to be living somewhere else for a little while." My daughter, Lily, looked confused. "What do you mean? Where's mommy going?" I forced a small smile. She needs some space to think. But you'll still see her, okay? She loves you very much. My son Jake was quiet, just staring at the floor. He's younger, but I could tell he understood something was wrong. Are you and Mommy mad at each other? He asked in a small voice. I wanted to say no, that everything would be fine. But I couldn't lie to them. Things have been tough between us, buddy. But we're going to make sure you two are okay, no matter what. Lily frowned. Why can't she just stay here? I felt my heart break a little. It's complicated, sweetheart. But I promise, I'm not going anywhere. I'll be right here with you. They didn't say much after that. They just nodded, still processing. I knew it wasn't enough to make sense of everything, but it was the best I could do. I'd protect them, make sure their lives stayed as normal as possible, even if mine was falling apart. A few days after telling the kids, Megan packed her things and left. It wasn't dramatic, no big scene, just her, carrying a couple of suitcases to her car and driving off like it was any other day. She didn't even say goodbye to the kids before leaving, which honestly hurt more than I expected. I watched from the living room window as she pulled out of the driveway, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. This was it. The house felt emptier without her, but at the same time, it was like a weight had been lifted. No more walking on eggshells, no more pretending. The kids asked about her that night at dinner. When's Mommy coming back? Lily asked, her voice small, trying to understand. I kept my tone gentle. She'll visit soon, but for now, she's staying at her own place. They didn't push too much after that, probably sensing I didn't have all the answers. I reassured them the best I could, but there was only so much I could say to make it better. They were kids, after all. They just wanted things to go back to the way they were. That night, after I put them to bed, I sat down with a glass of whiskey, staring at the paperwork the lawyer had sent over. Divorce documents. They were the last step, the final nail in the coffin of a marriage that had been dead for a while now. I wasn't ready to sign them yet, but I knew I would. Soon. After Megan moved out, things settled into a strange kind of routine. I focused on the kids, getting them to school, helping with homework, keeping things as normal as possible. Megan visited them occasionally, but it was always brief, almost like she was just checking a box. One evening, after she picked them up for dinner and dropped them back home, Lily came to me. Why doesn't Mommy stay here anymore? She asked, her eyes wide with confusion. I knelt down and pulled her into a hug. Mommy and we just need some time apart. But that doesn't change how much we both love you, okay? She nodded against my chest, but I could tell she was still struggling with it. Jake was quieter about the whole thing, keeping to himself more than usual. I knew they were both trying to process what was happening in their own way, and it killed me that I couldn't fix it for them. Meanwhile, I started making changes around the house. It was subtle at first, cleaning out the closet, rearranging the furniture, anything to make the place feel more like mine. The kids didn't notice much, but for me, it was a way of taking back control, little by little. One night, as I sat on the couch with the TV on low, I stared at the divorce papers sitting on the coffee table. They'd been there for days now, just waiting for me to make it official. I knew it was time. I couldn't keep putting it off. So I grabbed a pen, sat down at the table, and signed my name. The moment the ink hit the paper, it felt real. This chapter was over. Megan wasn't coming back, and I wasn't waiting for her to change her mind anymore. Once the divorce papers were signed, something shifted in me. It wasn't just about ending the marriage, it was about setting boundaries and moving forward with my life. I had been stuck in this limbo for too long, letting Megan's choices control everything. Now, it was time for me to take control. The next time Megan came over to pick up the kids, I told her we needed to talk. She gave me that same indifferent look, but I didn't let it rattle me. We need to get a schedule in place for the kids, I said. Something consistent. They need stability, and I'm not going to let them be caught in the middle of this. She shrugged, like it was no big deal. Fine. What do you want? I laid out the plan I had worked on with the lawyer, weekends with her, weekdays with me, no random pop-ins. Megan didn't seem to care much, just nodded as I spoke. I think she was relieved, honestly, that I wasn't fighting her on it. Also, I added, I don't want Maxine around the kids. That got her attention. Her eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms. Maxine's my best friend. She's done nothing wrong. I don't care, I said, my voice firm. She's part of the reason we're in this mess. I don't want her influencing them the way she's influenced you." Megan scoffed but didn't argue. I think deep down, she knew I was right, even if she didn't want to admit it. We agreed on the schedule, and just like that, it was done. No more uncertainty, no more waiting for her to decide when she felt like being involved. The kids needed consistency, and now they had it. After Megan left, I felt lighter. It was the first time in a long time that I felt like I had some control over the situation. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step forward. With the new schedule in place, things slowly started to stabilize. The kids adjusted pretty quickly, weekdays with me, weekends with Megan. I thought it might be harder for them, but kids are resilient. They seemed to settle into the routine, even if there were still questions now and then. One Friday evening, when Megan came to pick them up, Jake hugged me tight before heading out the door. "See you Sunday, Dad," he said quietly, like he wasn't fully on board with leaving. I ruffled his hair, trying to keep things light. "You're gonna have fun with Mom, buddy." "I'll be here when you get back," I reassured him, though part of me hated letting them go. Megan was in and out quickly, barely saying more than a few words to me. It was strange, having this person I'd spent over a decade with now reduced to brief, awkward exchanges. We weren't arguing anymore, but we weren't anything anymore, either. The weekends were the hardest. The house felt empty without the kids, and I found myself with too much time to think. I'd try to keep busy, chores, catching up on work, watching TV, but it was impossible to ignore the silence. I wondered what Megan was doing with them, if she was being the mom they needed, or if she was too distracted with her new life. One Sunday evening, when she dropped them back off, Lily came in with a look on her face I hadn't seen before. She seemed distant, like something was bothering her. I waited until Megan left before asking her about it. "Hey, sweetheart, everything okay?" I asked, sitting down next to her on the couch. She hesitated for a second before saying, "Mom had a friend over at her place." I tried to keep my face neutral. "A friend? Was it Maxine?" "No. It was a man," she said quietly, her voice unsure. "They were just talking, but it was weird." That hit me like a punch in the gut. I didn't know who this guy was, and I didn't like that he was around my kids. But I didn't want to make a big deal out of it in front of Lily. I just nodded and told her not to worry. "Thanks for telling me. I'll talk to Mom about it, okay?" She nodded, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. I hated that Megan was already dragging the kids into her new life, making them deal with things they shouldn't have to. But I kept calm, knowing I had to stay strong for them. That night, after the kids were asleep, I texted Megan. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I needed to set boundaries. Lily told me you had someone over. If you're going to have people around the kids, I need to know who they are. It took her a while to respond. "Megan, he's just a friend, Baxter. Don't make this a big deal." I'm not making it a big deal, but I need to know who's around them. They're already confused enough. There was no response after that. I knew Megan was going to do what she wanted, but at least I made my position clear. I wasn't going to let this slide. The kids came first, always. The next few weeks were quiet on the surface, but my mind was far from settled. Megan stuck to the custody schedule, and I kept things running smoothly at home. But ever since Lily mentioned that man, Eric, I hadn't been able to stop thinking about it. Megan had moved out, barely taking time to breathe before bringing someone new into the picture. I couldn't stop wondering who this guy was and what role he might end up playing in my kids' lives. It bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Sure, I knew Megan had checked out of our marriage long ago, but hearing that she was already moving on, involving someone else, it felt like a slap in the face. The worst part was that the kids were now caught in the middle of it, confused and unsure of what was going on. They didn't deserve that. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I found myself pacing the living room. I couldn't let it go. If this guy was going to be around my kids, I had a right to know who he was. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over Megan's contact. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I needed answers. So, I hit call. She picked up after a few rings, sounding annoyed. "What's up, Baxter?" "I'm busy." I cut right to the chase. "Lily told me you had someone over, a guy named Eric. I need to know who this is." She sighed, that long drawn-out sigh she always gave when she thought I was making a big deal out of nothing. "He's just a friend, okay? His name's Eric, I've known him for a while." "How long is a while?" I pressed, my patience wearing thin. Because if he's around the kids, I need to know who he is. This isn't about you, Megan. It's about them. Baxter, seriously? Her voice sharpened. He's not a stranger, all right? I wouldn't bring someone dangerous around them. That's not the point, and you know it, I snapped, struggling to keep my frustration under control. It's not about whether he's dangerous. It's about the kids. They're already confused, and now you're introducing some new guy into their lives? You don't think that's going to mess with their heads? There was a pause, and for a moment, I thought she might actually hear me. But then she spoke again, her tone soft but defensive. I get that this is hard for you, but I'm moving on, Baxter. I have the right to see other people. The kids are going to have to adjust to that. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew she was moving on, but hearing her say it so bluntly made it all too real. She wasn't thinking about the kids, not really. She was thinking about herself, about whatever it was she needed. I get that, I said quietly, doing my best to keep my emotions in check. But this isn't just about you moving on. It's about them. They've already been through enough. You can't just expect them to be okay with some new guy coming around out of nowhere. She was quiet for a long time. I could hear her breathing on the other end, like she was trying to figure out how to respond. Finally, she sighed again. I'll be careful, she said, her voice losing some of its edge. I'm not pushing anyone on them. But you need to trust me. I'm not going to hurt them. I want to believe that, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. But if you're serious about this guy, I need to know. The kids need to know. I'll let you know if it gets serious, she replied, her tone growing a little colder. But Baxter, this goes both ways. I don't want to hear about you parading anyone new around them either. That comment stung more than I expected. The truth was, I hadn't even considered dating again. I was too focused on the kids, too wrapped up in everything that had happened with Megan. The idea of bringing someone new into their lives felt so far off, but of course, Megan wouldn't know that. She probably thought I was ready to move on, just like she had. Noted, I muttered, then hung up. After that call, I couldn't help but feel a mix of frustration and resignation. I knew Megan was going to do what she wanted, and I couldn't control that. All I could do was set boundaries and hope she respected them. But it wasn't easy letting go of the worry, knowing someone new was being introduced into my kids' lives. I tried to focus on the positives. The kids were adjusting as well as they could, and I was doing everything in my power to keep their lives steady. Every evening, we spent time together, helping with homework, watching movies, playing board games. It was those small everyday moments that reminded me why I was fighting so hard to protect them. They were my priority now, and no matter what happened, that wasn't going to change. But late at night, when the house was quiet and I was left alone with my thoughts, the reality of everything would sink in. Megan had moved on, and sooner or later, I was going to have to face the fact that my life was changing too. I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. But for now, I'd hold on to the only thing that really mattered, being there for my kids, making sure they felt loved and safe. Whatever came next, I'd deal with it when the time came. The weeks after signing the divorce papers felt strange, like a weight had been lifted, but there was still an emptiness in the house. Megan and I were officially done, and while the finality of it hit me harder than I expected, I also felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. There was no more wondering, no more sleepless nights worrying about what she was doing or where things went wrong. It was over. I focused on keeping the kids happy and stable. They had started to adjust to the new normal, and while there were still questions, especially from Lily, they seemed to be doing better. One evening, after dinner, she asked me again, her little voice hesitant, "Dad, do you think Mommy's ever going to come back and live with us again?" I sat down beside her on the couch, taking her hand. It was moments like this that I dreaded, but I knew I had to be honest. "No, sweetheart. Mommy and I are living in different places now, and that's not going to change. But you'll still see her, and I'll always be here with you." She nodded, looking down at her hands, and I could tell she was trying to process it. But why can't we all just live together? It was such an innocent question, one that made my heart ache. "Sometimes grown-ups don't get along the way they used to," I said softly. "But that doesn't mean we love you any less. It just means things are different now. And even though it's hard, we'll be okay. I promise." She leaned into me, and I wrapped my arm around her, feeling the weight of responsibility but also the strength that came with it. I had to be her anchor, her source of stability. Jake, on the other hand, didn't ask as many questions. He was quieter, more reserved, but I made sure to spend time with him too, playing catch in the backyard, helping him with his schoolwork, or just sitting with him while he played with his action figures. They both needed me in different ways, and that was my focus now. The house felt quieter without Megan, but that quiet wasn't the same kind of emptiness it had been in the beginning. It was a calmness I hadn't had in years, a calmness I didn't even realize I needed. I started making little changes around the place. I cleaned out our old bedroom, got rid of things that reminded me of the past, and turned the space into something that felt more like my own. It wasn't about erasing her, it was about creating a new space for me and the kids, a space where we could start fresh. One Saturday, after I dropped the kids off with Megan, I found myself alone in the house. At first, the quiet had always made me anxious, like I didn't know what to do with myself when they weren't around. But this time, it felt different. I sat on the couch for a while, just thinking about everything, how far I'd come since that awful day when Megan announced she was going on a date with another man. It felt like a lifetime ago. I had been so lost then, so crushed by the betrayal. But now, sitting in the house we used to share, I realized I wasn't broken anymore. Aaron called me that evening, checking in like he always did. He had been my rock through all of this, and I appreciated how he never pushed too hard but always knew when I needed to talk. "How are things going, Bax?" he asked, his voice warm through the phone. "I'm okay," I said, surprised at how true it felt. "It's been rough, but I think I'm finally getting there." He paused for a moment, then said, "You sound better. Like you're finally coming out of the fog." I hadn't really thought about it that way, but he was right. There had been this heavy cloud hanging over me for so long, but now for the first time in what felt like forever, I could see through it. Life wasn't perfect, but I was handling it. I was moving forward. We talked for a while longer, and after I hung up, I found myself thinking about what moving forward really meant. For months, I had been in survival mode, just getting through each day. But now, I realized it was time to start living again. I didn't have all the answers, but I didn't need them. I had my kids, my home, and my future, whatever that looked like. The divorce was finalized a few days later. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the signed documents, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, hope, it was all there, swirling around inside me. But mostly, I felt ready to close that chapter and move on. I made sure the kids didn't feel the weight of it. I kept things normal, kept our routine steady. We still had movie nights, game nights, and pizza Fridays. Those small traditions became even more important to me, a way to remind them that no matter how much changed, we were still a family. One night, as I tucked Jake into bed, he looked up at me and said, "I like when it's just us, Dad." I smiled down at him, feeling a warmth spread through me. "I like it too, buddy." As I closed his door and headed back downstairs, I realized I was okay. The house didn't feel empty anymore, it felt like home. It was different, sure, but it was ours. And that was enough. The future didn't seem so daunting now. There were still things to figure out, how to co-parent with Megan, how to rebuild my life, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I had my kids, and I had my own sense of peace. Whatever came next, I was ready. As I sat on the couch that night, the house quiet around me, I felt a calm settle over me. I had made it through the worst, and I was still standing. I was stronger than I had given myself credit for, and I had my kids to thank for that. They gave me the purpose I needed to keep going, to rebuild, to move on. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. A new beginning was waiting for me, and this time, I wasn't afraid to embrace it.